Imagine you are the head of Nazi Germany's military intelligence, your most trusted spy in Britain, a man whose reports have proven accurate dozens of times, a man whose network of agents stretches across the entire country, sends you an urgent message on the morning of June 6, 1944. The Allies have just landed in Normandy, but your spy tells you something extraordinary, that the landing is a trick, a diversion, that the real invasion, the massive one, the one that will decide the war, is still coming, and it's headed for a completely different coastline. And you believe him, so completely, so absolutely, that you hold back your most powerful armored divisions and wait. You wait for the invasion that is never coming, because the man you trusted most was never working for you at all. He was working for Britain. He had been, for 3 years, and his name was not even his real name. Barcelona, 1912. Juan Pujol García was born into a comfortable middle-class Catalan family, the son of an industrialist father with liberal political beliefs and a fierce sense of personal honor. By most outward measures, the young Juan was unremarkable. He was not a brilliant student. He was not a natural soldier. He was not a gifted businessman. In fact, if you were to look at the first 30 years of Juan Pujol's life and try to identify what he was genuinely, outstandingly good at, you would come up empty-handed. He managed to fail as a student, fail at several business ventures, stumble through 2 sides of the Spanish Civil War without any particular distinction, and arrive at the beginning of the Second World War as a 30-year-old chicken farmer in Barcelona with no obvious skills, no connections, no credentials, and no clear future. He was, on paper, the last person on earth you would ever recruit as a spy. But Juan Pujol had something that doesn't show up on any resume, something that cannot be taught in any training school or developed through any conventional process. He had an extraordinary mind for deception, not the cold, calculated kind that intelligence professionals cultivate through years of tradecraft. Something more instinctive than that, something almost artistic. He had an ability to construct alternative realities, to build elaborate, convincing, internally consistent fictions and then inhabit them so completely that the people he was deceiving never thought to question what they were being told. He was, in the truest sense of the word, a natural. He just hadn't found his stage yet. The Spanish Civil War, which tore his country apart between 1936 and 1939, gave Pujol his first look at what totalitarianism truly was. He watched neighbors disappear. He saw what happened to people who fell on the wrong side of ideology. He fought, reluctantly and briefly, on both sides of the conflict, managing, by his own later account, to do so without firing a single bullet for either one. By the time the war ended, he had developed what would become the defining conviction of his life, a deep, unshakable hatred of fascism in all its forms, and a particular, burning contempt for the ideology of Adolf Hitler. When the Second World War began in September 1939 and the Nazi war machine began rolling across Europe with terrifying efficiency, Juan Pujol García, a failed chicken farmer in Barcelona, made a decision that would, in time, alter the course of human history. He decided he was going to do something about it. The question was what? He had no money, no influence, no military rank, no intelligence connections. He was a civilian in a neutral country, watching a continent burn from the outside. By any rational calculation, there was nothing he could do. But Juan Pujol had never been especially interested in rational calculations. In 1941, Juan Pujol walked into the British embassy in Madrid and offered to spy against Nazi Germany. He was shown the door. The British, who were fighting for their survival and desperately short of reliable intelligence assets across Europe, somehow looked at this earnest, unremarkable Spaniard sitting across the desk from them and decided he was not worth their time. There were no connections, no verifiable track record, no reason to trust him. He was turned away, politely but firmly, without a second thought. A less determined man would have gone home. Pujol did not go home. He thought about the problem from a different angle entirely. If the British wouldn't recruit him, he reasoned, perhaps he needed to make himself more recruitable. And the best way to do that, perhaps the only way, was to first go and work for the other side. Not because he had any intention of actually helping the Germans, but because a man who could demonstrate that he had already penetrated German intelligence and was feeding Berlin false information was a much more attractive proposition than a man who was simply offering to try. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity, conceived by a man with no resources and no safety net, operating entirely alone. In early 1941, Pujol approached German intelligence, the Abwehr, in Madrid. He presented himself as a fanatical pro-Nazi Spanish official with access to Britain, burning with ideological devotion to Hitler's New World Order and eager to prove his worth to the Reich. He was, he told them, willing to travel to London and begin building a spy network immediately. The Germans, who were apparently not as good at reading people as they liked to think, believed him completely. They gave him training, a code name, an accommodation address in Lisbon, and instructions. They told him to recruit sub-agents across Britain and send his reports back through Portugal. They called him Arabel, and then they sent him off to London to begin his work for the Führer. Pujol did not go to London. He had never been to London. He didn't speak English. Instead, he went to Lisbon, found himself a room, bought a blue guide tourist map of Britain, a KLM airline timetable, and a general reference book about the British Armed Forces from a local library. He sat down at a desk and began to write reports. Detailed, convincing, and entirely fabricated reports about things he had allegedly seen, people he had allegedly met, and intelligence he had allegedly gathered in a country he had never visited. He wrote about troop movements and convoy departures and harbor activity and the mood of the British public. He invented agents, giving them names, personalities, backstories, and convincing details. He described the weather in cities he had never seen, cross-checked against the tourist guide to make sure his descriptions were plausible. He filed his reports via KLM pilots who flew between Lisbon and Britain and were willing, for a fee, to carry correspondence. It was an act of staggering creative improvisation, and it worked. The Germans, receiving what appeared to be a steady, reliable stream of intelligence from a well-placed asset in Britain, were delighted. They told him his reports were magnificent. They gave him more money. They asked him to expand his network. Pujol, sitting in his Lisbon flat with a tourist map and a reference book, invented more agents and wrote more letters. He was, at this point, running the most elaborate and successful fiction in the history of espionage. And he was doing it entirely on his own initiative, with no training, no backup, and no idea whether any of it would ever amount to anything. For 9 months, Pujol ran his one-man deception operation from Lisbon. During that time, he made several more attempts to contact British intelligence directly, now with something concrete to offer. He wrote letters. He made approaches through intermediaries. He tried every channel he could find, and for 9 months, the British intelligence establishment continued to regard him with skepticism. There were concerns that he might be a German plant, a double bluff, designed to feed disinformation to the Allies while appearing to work for them. It was a reasonable concern, and in the paranoid world of wartime intelligence, caution was usually the right instinct. But in Pujol's case, caution meant nearly missing one of the most remarkable assets any intelligence service has ever stumbled across. What eventually broke the deadlock was a convoy. In late 1941, one of Pujol's fictional agents, a man he had invented and named as working from Glasgow, reported that a large British convoy had departed, painted in Mediterranean camouflage, apparently headed south. Pujol sent this report to his German handlers in Lisbon, then deliberately routed the message in a way that ensured it would arrive too late to be of any operational use. When the convoy subsequently arrived in North Africa exactly as his fictional agent had described, the Germans were beside themselves with admiration. Their best spy in Britain had spotted the convoy before it sailed. The report confirmed him as genuine beyond any reasonable doubt. And when British intelligence analysts, tracking German signals traffic through the Bletchley Park codebreakers, saw the German response, saw how completely and enthusiastically Berlin had swallowed Pujol's story, they finally understood what they were dealing with. In April 1942, Juan Pujol García and his wife Araceli were brought to Britain under conditions of great secrecy. Was given a code name by MI5, a name that his handler Cyril Mills suggested to reflect the quality of his performance. They called him Garbo, after Greta Garbo, the most gifted actor of the age. It was, by any measure, an apt choice. Pujol was given a case officer, a brilliant Spanish-speaking MI5 officer named Tomas Harris, whose cultural intelligence and linguistic fluency made him the perfect partner for what was about to become the most audacious deception operation of the entire war. The partnership between Pujol and Harris is one of the most extraordinary in the history of intelligence. They worked together in an office on Jermyn Street in central London, 7 days a week, often 6 to 8 hours a day, constructing and maintaining a fictional universe of breathtaking complexity. The letters they wrote to Pujol's German handlers averaged 2,000 words each. They wrote 315 of them. The writing style had been established by Pujol himself back in his Lisbon days, verbose, passionate, ideologically fervent, laced with the kind of florid Nazi enthusiasm that the Abwehr found deeply reassuring. Every letter was a performance. Every report was a carefully engineered mixture of genuine low-value information, cleverly delayed accurate intelligence, and outright fabrication, blended in proportions designed to keep the Germans believing without ever giving them anything that could actually hurt the Allied war effort. At its peak, the spy network that Juan Pujol García reported running across Britain consisted of 27 agents. There was a Welsh nationalist who hated the English and was willing to betray them for ideological reasons. There was a seaman based in Liverpool with access to shipping intelligence. There was a soldier in Scotland. There was a contact in the Ministry of Information. There was a man in the Venezuelan consulate. There were subagents and sub-subagents, each with names, personalities, families, addresses, employers, and convincing personal histories. The Germans funded this entire network, paying out the equivalent of what would today be over $1 million to support its operations. Every penny went to the British government. Not one of those 27 agents existed. Every single one was a character in a story that Pujol and Harris had written. The Welshman who hated the English, the seaman in Liverpool, the soldier in Scotland. All fiction, all maintained with such meticulous consistency, such attention to detail, such careful internal logic, that the Germans never once questioned their existence. When one of the fictional agents made a mistake, reporting information that turned out to be wrong, or missing something they should plausibly have seen, Pujol would write a stern letter to his handlers explaining the error and sometimes disciplining the agent in question. The Germans sympathized. The Germans understood. Of course, subagents sometimes made mistakes. Even the best networks had their weaknesses. Garbo was doing everything right. The detail that Pujol and Harris invested in maintaining this fictional world was extraordinary. When one imaginary agent became too much of a liability, when his fictional position made it impossible to keep his reports internally consistent, Pujol reported that he had died. He planted a fake death notice in a British newspaper. The Germans, receiving word of their agent's passing, sent a message of condolence to his widow. His widow, naturally, did not exist. But somewhere in Germany, a condolence message was composed and sent to a fictitious address for a man who had never lived, grieving a loss that had never occurred. It is difficult to know whether to be more struck by the audacity of the deception or by the sheer, painstaking labor it required to sustain. The Germans became so completely overwhelmed by the volume and apparent quality of the intelligence coming from the Garbo network that they made a decision of extraordinary strategic significance. They stopped trying to recruit any additional agents in Britain. Why would they bother? They already had the best spy in the country. His network covered every angle. His reports were comprehensive. His agents were everywhere. There was simply no need to send anyone else. This meant that British intelligence, which had worked so hard to roll up and turn every German agent operating in the country, never had to worry about a new arrival slipping through the net and discovering what was really going on. Garbo's fictional network had, in effect, become a shield, protecting the real secrets of the British war effort behind a wall of invented ones. By 1943, Juan Pujol was arguably the most trusted intelligence asset the German High Command possessed in the entire Western theater of the war. His reports were being included in OKW intelligence summaries, the highest level of German military intelligence assessment, read by the most senior commanders in the Wehrmacht. He had the ear of people who had the ear of Hitler himself. The man sitting in a modest house in Hendon, North London, inventing agents and writing letters 6 days a week, had climbed, through pure creative genius, to the very apex of Nazi Germany's intelligence apparatus. And he had done it while being, at every moment, entirely loyal to the country that had originally turned him away at the door. The radio became the primary communication method from August 1943. For radio encryption, the Germans provided Pujol with one of their most sophisticated cipher systems. They had no idea that by handing Garbo this system, they were also handing it to the codebreakers at Bletchley Park, who could now use the known plaintext of Pujol's messages to attack German Enigma keys with a precision they had never previously achieved. In trying to keep their best spy secure, the Germans had given British intelligence one of the most powerful cryptanalytic advantages of the entire war. The relationship between Pujol and his German handlers had, by this point, taken on the quality of something almost touching in its tragic absurdity. They genuinely believed in him. They worried about his safety. They sent him money to look after his fictional agents. They wrote warmly and personally, treating him not merely as an asset, but as a valued colleague, a trusted friend, a man who was risking his life for a cause they shared. Pujol responded with equal warmth, equal personal investment, equal apparent commitment. He posed as the employee of a large fruit and vegetable importer based at Covent Garden Market, a cover story that explained his movements and contacts without raising any suspicion. The Germans accepted all of it. Every detail, every letter, every invented personality, all of it swallowed whole. Then came the moment that pushed the entire absurdity to its most dizzying extreme. On July 29, 1944, 7 weeks after D-Day, with the Allied liberation of Europe already underway, Pujol received a message from his German handlers. The Führer himself, it said, had taken note of the extraordinary services rendered by his most loyal and effective agent in Britain. Adolf Hitler had awarded Juan Pujol García the Iron Cross, the highest military honor of the Third Reich, for his work on behalf of Nazi Germany. Pujol and Harris composed a suitably humble reply, expressing Garbo's deep unworthiness of such an honor and his eternal gratitude to the Führer. Then Pujol walked out of his office on Jermyn Street, and later that same year, accepted the Member of the Order of the British Empire, awarded by the King of England for exactly the same work. He is, to this day, the only person in the history of the Second World War to have been decorated by both sides. Everything that Juan Pujol García had built, the network, the trust, the 3 years of careful relationship management with the German High Command, was preparation for a single moment. One operation, one lie so enormous, so consequential, so perfectly timed, that if it worked, it would change the outcome of the entire war. That operation was called Fortitude. And the lie at its heart was this, that the Allied invasion of Europe was not going to happen at Normandy. By early 1944, everyone on both sides of the war knew that the Allied invasion of occupied Europe was coming. The only question was where. And the Germans, guided by geography and logic, were fairly confident they knew the answer. The Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, just 21 miles of water between the French coast and the English shore, was the most obvious target. Shortest crossing, best port infrastructure, most direct route to Germany. Hitler himself was convinced that Calais was the target, and he had concentrated a substantial portion of his best defensive forces accordingly. If the Allies landed at Calais, they would face the most formidable defenses in Western Europe. So they were going to land at Normandy instead. And they needed the Germans to keep believing, for as long as possible, that the real invasion was still coming, that whatever happened at Normandy was merely a preliminary feint, and that the main assault would arrive at Calais with overwhelming force. Every day that the German armored reserves waited at Calais instead of moving to Normandy was a day that Allied soldiers could consolidate the beachhead, pour in reinforcements, and build the strength needed to break out into France. The question was how to make the Germans believe a thing that was not true, and keep believing it even after the real invasion had actually happened. The answer was Garbo. Between January 1944 and D-Day on June 6th, Pujol sent over 500 radio messages to his German handlers, sometimes more than 20 in a single day. His fictional agents reported on troop movements, on training exercises, on equipment being loaded at ports. A massive, entirely fictitious army group called FUSAG, the first United States Army group, was being assembled in southeast England, opposite the Pas de Calais, under the command of General George Patton, the most aggressive and feared American commander the Germans faced. FUSAG existed on paper, in signals traffic, in Garbo's reports, and in the form of inflatable rubber tanks, fake airfields, and vans driving around the Kent countryside transmitting bogus radio chatter. It did not exist in any other sense. There were no troops. There were no tanks. There were no landing craft. There was only the idea of an army, maintained in the imagination of the German high command by one man's extraordinary gift for sustained, creative, utterly convincing deception. On June 9, 1944, 3 days after the Normandy landings had already begun, Juan Pujol sent the most important message of his life. Allied forces were already ashore on the beaches of France. The Germans were debating whether to commit their armored reserves, several panzer divisions and 19 infantry divisions, from their positions near Calais down to Normandy to reinforce the defense. If those divisions moved, the beachhead might not hold. The carefully built Allied position, still fragile in those first critical days, could be overwhelmed before the breakthrough became unstoppable. Pujol's message told his handlers that the Normandy landing was exactly what the Allies wanted the Germans to think it was, a diversion. The real invasion was still coming. FUSAG was still ready. The Pas de Calais was still the primary target. His agents were reporting it unanimously. He staked his reputation, everything he had built over 3 years, on this assessment. He told them to hold. And they held. The panzer divisions stayed near Calais. The 19 infantry divisions waited for an invasion that was never coming. All through July and into August 1944, those divisions sat in position, waiting for Garbo's second wave. By the time the German high command finally understood the full scale of what had happened to them, the Allied beachhead was unbreakable, the breakout was underway, and the liberation of Western Europe was no longer in doubt. After the war, when historians and intelligence analysts went through the captured German records and tried to reconstruct exactly what had happened, the scale of what Juan Pujol had achieved became almost incomprehensible. No fewer than 62 of Garbo's reports had been included in OKW intelligence summaries, the most senior level of German military assessment. His fictional network had been so overwhelmingly productive that the Abwehr had genuinely stopped looking for real spies in Britain, effectively handing MI5 total dominance over German human intelligence operations in the country. The cipher system the Germans had provided to keep him secure had been fed directly to Bletchley Park and used to attack Enigma keys. And his D-Day message had kept the best German armored reserves out of Normandy for weeks. Weeks that made the difference between a beachhead that held and one that might not have. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander-in-chief in the West, was among those who had been completely taken in. Even after D-Day, even as the evidence of the real invasion mounted all around him, he had overruled General Rommel's insistence that the panzer divisions should move from Calais to Normandy. Von Rundstedt believed in Garbo. The British intelligence official history later noted that if Rommel's divisions had moved when he wanted them to, their intervention in the Normandy battle could genuinely have tipped the balance. The decision to keep them at Calais, a decision driven in large part by Garbo's reports, may well have saved the lives of tens of thousands of Allied soldiers and shortened the war in Western Europe by months. The Germans, of course, never knew any of this during the war. Right to the end, the Abwehr believed in Arabel. Right to the end, they trusted the man they had decorated with the Iron Cross. The intelligence failure was total, comprehensive, and historically unprecedented. A single individual, operating from a modest house in Hendon with nothing but his wits and the support of one brilliant case officer, had fooled the intelligence apparatus of the most powerful military machine in the world, and in doing so, had helped determine the outcome of the most destructive conflict in human history. The war ended in May 1945. For most people, that was the end of extraordinary stories and the beginning of the slow, painful work of rebuilding ordinary life. For Juan Pujol García, it was the beginning of one final chapter of deception, this time not for any government or cause, but simply for his own survival. As the war concluded and the full extent of the Allied victory became clear, Pujol found himself facing a problem that had not occurred to him in 1941 when he first walked into a German consulate in Madrid and offered his services to the Reich. There were, scattered across Europe and beyond, former Nazi intelligence officers, SS men, and committed ideologues who had not accepted defeat gracefully. Some of them knew the name Arabel. Some of them were angry. Some of them were dangerous. And the fear, reasonable, perhaps even well-founded, was that sooner or later, one of them would come looking. With the help of MI5, Juan Pujol García traveled to Angola in 1949 and faked his own death. The cover story was malaria, a plausible enough cause of death in equatorial Africa. A death certificate was issued. The news filtered through to those who might have been looking for him. As far as the world was concerned, Arabel was dead, and so, for that matter, was Garbo. He then slipped away to Venezuela, settled in the city of Caracas, and built a completely new life. He ran a bookshop, then a language school, teaching English to local employees of Shell Oil. He married again, had 3 more children, and lived quietly for more than 3 decades. Nobody knew where he was. Very few people knew he was alive. The greatest double agent of the Second World War was running a small business in South America, and the world had no idea. It was not until 1984 that a British writer and military historian named Nigel West, who had become suspicious of the official story of Pujol's death, tracked him down through a painstaking process of investigation and careful inquiry. He found him in Caracas. He found him alive, in his 70s, quietly going about his life. Pujol agreed to meet. And then, for the first time, the full story of Agent Garbo came out into the open. He returned briefly to Europe, reconnecting with his first wife Araceli, who had always suspected he hadn't really died, and visiting Britain, where he was quietly celebrated by the intelligence community that had depended so completely on his genius. He died in Caracas on October 10, 1988, of a genuine cause this time, and was buried in Venezuela, almost entirely without ceremony. Here is the thing that stays with you when you sit with this story long enough. Juan Pujol García was not recruited. He was not trained. He was not developed by any intelligence service as a long-term asset. He was a man who walked in off the street and was turned away. A failed chicken farmer who decided, entirely on his own initiative, with no resources and no safety net, that he was going to deceive the Third Reich. And then he went and did it. For 3 years. Without being caught. Without making a single mistake that unraveled the whole thing. While simultaneously helping Britain win the most important battle of the Second World War. The question that lingers is a simple one. What if he had been believed the first time? What if the British officer who sent him away in Madrid in 1941 had listened more carefully, looked more closely, been willing to take a chance on an ordinary man with an extraordinary idea? What might have been done earlier? How much more might have been achieved? We will never know. History rarely gives us the answer to the roads not taken. What it gives us instead is this: a record of what one person, with no advantages and no obvious gifts beyond a refusal to accept that the situation was hopeless, was able to accomplish by sheer force of will and imagination. It is, in the end, one of the strangest and most extraordinary stories the Second World War produced. And it is entirely true. Juan Pujol García received the Iron Cross and the OB for the same work. He fooled Hitler, saved D-Day, shortened a war, and then faked his own death and ran a bookshop in Venezuela for 30 years. He never received a state funeral. He never had a monument built in his honor. He died quietly, in a city far from the country he had helped to save, and was buried without ceremony. There is something in that ending that feels exactly right. He was never in it for recognition. He was in it because he believed totalitarianism was wrong, and because he thought he could do something about it, and because, against every reasonable expectation, he turned out to be correct. The man who failed at everything found the one thing he was born to do. And he did it better than anyone, before or since.